Hi, everybody. Just wanted to make a video going over the informed speech, which is the first speech of our course. And so I wanted to kind of go over what you need to be aware of in order to be successful on this assignment and go through the guidelines with you. And so in this course, we talk about a bunch of different speeches, and all the speeches have different purposes, right? So they have to persuade, to inform, to entertain, or to inspire. And we'll talk about all of those in this course, but the first one we're going to begin with is to inform. And the goal of an informative speech, what you must do is provide new and useful information. You want to teach your audience something, right? So for this speech, we want your informed speech to specifically be a process. So you're going to teach someone how something works or how something comes to be, right? So you're going to focus on a process, a system, or a mechanism and teach us how it operates. Okay. You're not going to tell us the history of something or causes or pro and cons that delves into a little bit of persuasive speaking. We want to focus on strictly informing our audiences. And really good informative speakers, they don't just list facts at you. They don't just, rattle off a list, right? If we wanted that, we would just read the Wikipedia page ourselves, right? They explain it to you, to their audiences. They teach you, okay? And so you need to be able to make connections for your audience so that they can walk away feeling like they reasonably learned something. And since we are audience centered speakers in this course, we aren't self centered speakers. We talk about being audience centered. We want to think about who our audience is, right? So our audience is primarily made up of college students. And so, what kind of topics are you going to be looking at? Um, to pick for this speech that might interest an audience of college students, right? So let's kind of go through here. Some topics that we gave you as examples are very process focused. What we're looking for is something like how noise canceling headphones block sound, or how anesthesia blocks pain during surgery, how composting breaks down organic matter, or how a bill becomes law in Indiana, or how credit scores are calculated, right? So all of these are processes, um, and you're going to explain how these things work, right? We're not doing a demonstration, but you are explaining how these things function. Okay. And when you're thinking about topic and how to choose your topic, maybe think about your interests. Start there. Maybe your major or career. Maybe you're an expert on something and we don't even know about it, right? So start from there, or you can kind of think about, I've always wondered how this works, right? And you can go into your own experiences or communities and think about things that, you've never really thought about before, right? What is something you're curious about? Um, so, whatever your topic, you want to make sure that it's not too broad. There is a time limit on this speech of 3 minutes, 30 seconds to 5 minutes. Okay. So, there's a 30-second grace period on both ends. So, 3 minutes to 5:30, right? Without getting a deduction. So make sure you're picking something that's specific, that you can explain in a reasonable amount of time. And if it's too broad, then it can be, kind of hard to narrow down. Make sure it's audience appropriate. It should be explainable to college students without any specialized training. Okay. And that it is reasonably teachable in that 3:30 to 5 time allotment, right? And so pick something that's interested in you. If it's something that, piques at your curiosity, it likely piques at your audience's curiosity too, right? Okay. And so I have some resources up here that I want to point out. We have our outline template that you want to follow. We want to emphasize an introduction, body, and conclusion in this speech. And in between those things, you want to make sure you're having a transition. Okay. So tell us what you just covered and tell us what you're moving to next. Okay. Now that we've talked about this, we can move on to here. Other transitional phrases like next, first, finally, right? So make sure you're incorporating those. All right. And we will go over more of these in class, but you want to think about how to grab your audience's attention. We talked about not saying, "Hi, my name is." Keep those things in mind as well. And I got a PDF version of that template. And then I have an example outline of a speech. And then we have a giant list of topic examples for you to look at. Okay. All right. So, with the organization, the other thing I want to say is a chronological approach should be used. So, making sure you'll go in order of how that process works, right? The other thing that is important to note is we'll do different types of delivery in this class, different modes of delivery. And for this speech, it must be delivered extemporaneously. Okay. So delivering extemporaneously means that you are conversational and using limited notes. Okay. So you are not reading word for word, you are not memorized, uh, but you are using notes and you are rehearsed, right? So in an ideal world, you have written out your outline and then transferred your outline to note cards and then practice a few times so that you're knowledgeable on the topic, but you're not necessarily memorized or reading, right? So you are allowed 3 handwritten note cards for this speech. And that needs to be on a standard note card, 3 by 5 or 4 by 6 inches. And it needs to be handwritten. Okay. So nothing typed up unless there's an accommodation for that. And it cannot be a sticky note. It cannot be pieces of paper cut up. And it definitely cannot be your phone, tablet, or laptop. Okay. And so we will provide you those 3 note cards. If you lose any, go ahead and come up to the main office on the 3rd floor of Letterman and they can give you some backup ones. But your lab instructor will provide you with notes. Okay. Full sentences are not permitted on these note cards, except if it's a quotation from one of your oral citations. Okay. So, 3 note cards handwritten on one side. We will collect them at the end of your speech. And I've kind of already talked about we will do extemporaneous delivery. So, making sure we are trying to look more at our audience and practicing so that we only rely on our note cards very minimally. And we want to use them more so as guides rather than scripts, right? So we're avoiding manuscript speaking. And so the expectation here is that you are able to practice a decent amount so that you can more easily engage with your audience, right? Uh, we'll talk about more delivery strategies as we go through the course, but making sure that we limit ourselves in note cards can help make us focus and prioritize that audience connection when we're not reading. All right, so research for this speech, you will have to do some research on your process that you choose. And then you're going to use 4 sources, okay? And these need to be credible sources. These can be books, journals, news sources, trusted websites, but we don't really want to prioritize personal experience or dictionaries or interviews with family or friends. Those are sources, but they're not as strong, credible sources. So you can use those to supplement what you have, but they won't count towards your 4 credible sources. Okay. So your 4 credible sources need to be different from one another, right? So they need to be different sources. And we will use oral citations in this class. So instead of just doing an in-text citation like you would in English paper, you need to be citing them out loud since we're not reading your script in front of you. So that sounds something like, according to March 13th, 2025 article in The Atlantic, right? Or the New York Times of January 1st, 2026 states, okay? And so with oral citations, we'll talk even more about them in class, but the big 2 things you need is the source and the date, right? So the where and the when, right? You need when the source was published and what the source is. Where did you find it and when was it published? Typically, with credible news sources, you can say just the title of the publication. You don't necessarily need to state the author. The publication is more recognizable. So keep that in mind as you move along. So, what to submit? You will be submitting before you speak a typed preparation outline And this needs to be a PDF or doc, okay? No links to Google Drive. That will be submitted along with your works cited page, okay? And your works cited page can be done in APA or MLA format. Either is fine with us. And we have some resources, and the Bracken Library has resources on those formatting, okay? And then we'll have our rubric down here. I definitely encourage you to go through that in detail, okay? And that is pretty much it, all right? If you have any other further questions, please reach out to your lecturer or your lab instructor. And we're really excited to hear the great ideas you have and share and learn from your interesting processes. So please reach out if you have questions. Please stop by the Speaking Center and make an appointment if you would like to get some help with a speaking coach. Thanks, everyone.